All right, cool. Thank you for coming, everybody. I am Nick Ward. I'm gonna be moderating the panel today. We have some really great guests, and thank you all for braving the cold. So, first up, we have Randy Green. He's the attorney for us today from Meyer Cable. He'll be doing the nice PowerPoint. We got Butch Dallahus with Rector Solar and Roofing. We got Mark Whitsitt from Whitsitt and Associates. He's the real estate appraiser today. Chris Greenwald from Country Insurance is our insurance agent today. Financial insurance, that's what it was. We got Brad Barnes with Ameren, Illinois, and Sam Smith, the chief of the Savoy Fire Department. We can give them a round of applause. Cool. So the plan today is each panelist is going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to kind of go over some general information they've prepared for us. And then I have some questions that people sent in that I'll be asking, and then we'll kind of open it up to everybody with questions at the end. Any questions about that? Cool. Save it to the end. All right. You're up, Randy.
All right. Am I just going from here?
Yeah, turn it on.
Here you go.
That's right. All right. There. Is that on? Can you guys hear me with or without it?
Yeah.
All right. So I've given this presentation to this group a while back, to the Bar Association, to the entire state for title matters. So really, there's enough information in here to last an hour or more, but I'm going to skim through this and hit some highlights that I think is most important to you all as real estate agents. So the first thing to understand when you're dealing with a solar system is what's the nature of the system. And I'm going to say solar system a lot, even though it's a weird term, but you're going to hear me say it. So just deal with it. Know that I'm talking about these little, these little solar panels on your roof and not the planets going around the solar system. Okay. So really you've got a couple situations that we run into commonly here in Champaign-Urbana. That's buying it either outright or financed and leasing it. There's also these power purchase agreements, which are basically a contractual agreement with a solar company to effectively rent the space on your roof, generate the power, give you a reduced fee on your energy. Those are more common out west. We don't see a lot of them. At least I've not seen any of them around here. So if any of you have seen those in a residential context, I guess let me know and I'll educate people a little bit more on those. But kind of first and foremost, when you're dealing with selling or buying property that has solar equipment on it, is figuring out, is it owned? If so, is it owned outright or is it financed? Or is it leased? Because depending on the nature of the system, the approach from a legal standpoint is going to be very different in all three of those circumstances. A couple things I want to touch on from a kind of legal side, just so you guys understand what we're dealing with from a title standpoint and from a lender standpoint. So you get these terms, fixture, chattel, personal property, real property. You guys all went through your broker exam. How do you guys describe fixtures? I bet I know, but
Attached to the.
how?
Permanently.
Like, what does that mean? Like bolted on? Like with super glue? Gravity?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I mean, does a screw? Because I mean, you're like a light fan is attached with a couple little screws, right? We'd all say that's probably a fixture. Blinds, curtains. If you got to take the rod off, is that permanent? Like, this is a super gray area. And this is important for a couple reasons for solar panels. Okay, because a fixture actually has three components to determine if something's a fixture. Let me stop. Who thinks solar panels are fixtures? Who thinks they're something else? Who's afraid to raise their hand? Okay, so here's kind of the three-part test as to what is in fact a fixture. Okay, so the nature of its attachment to the realty, that's what we all talk about. What's the nature of the attachment? How permanent is the attachment? Is it set in concrete? Or is it a screw that somebody could remove with a Phillips screwdriver? Those are different. Or is it one of those 3M sticky things? Those are all different forms of attachment that matter, but they're in fact not the most critical thing to determine if something's a fixture. The next is the adaptation to the necessity for the purpose for which the premises are devoted. So that's a long way of saying, is the thing necessary for the real property that's attached to serve its purpose, right? And so take, for example, lights in the house. Those light fixtures are to serve the house, right? Without them, the house itself can't be lit, and that's not a full functional house. Solar panels, on the other hand, are a little bit different. Unless you're living off grid, solar panels aren't necessary to deliver power to the property. Okay, they generate extra power to put on the grid, which you then technically buy back from the grid. So from that sense, they're actually not characteristic of a fixture. And then the third one, which is the most important, and these kind of go in order in terms of importance, determining if something's a fixture. The third one is, was it intended that the item is considered part of the realty? Okay, and I think a lot of us would say, yeah, that was probably intended. But if you have a lease, or if you have a system that was financed, you probably have loan documents where you have a lease that says very expressly that the parties don't intend it to be a fixture. They want it to be personal property. And the reason is the way that you perfect a lien in personal property is different than perfecting a lien in a fixture or real property, which require the filing in the local county. Okay, so all that's a long way of saying is that when push comes to shove, solar panels actually aren't very characteristic of fixtures, even though they're harder to remove than other things that we might consider fixtures. Okay, so this is actually out of a financing document from an actual solar system here in town. And it says, you can see very clearly, you and we both expressly intend that no portion of the collateralized goods, which are the panels, the little brackets, all the wiring and stuff, constitute a fixture attached to any real property. Okay, so most of the loan agreements, most of the leases will say something along these lines, is that it's our intent that these are not to be treated as fixtures. And the intent is kind of the most important thing when determining, when a court determines if something is a fixture or not. And so this is why this is important. This is actually from our MLS contract. I looked, the newest one is verbatim the same. This hasn't changed. But I'm just going to read it to point out some inconsistencies. Sellers warrant that, man, this is test my vision. Sellers warrant that no contracts for the furnishing of any labor or material to the land or the improvements thereon. Okay, so solar panels are not land, they're not improvements. And no security agreements or leases in respect to any goods or chattels that have been or are to become attached to the land or any improvements thereon as fixtures. Okay, so this is the encumbrance portion of our MLS contract that deals with encumbrances on land improvement and fixtures. And there's a real question as to, there's plenty of gray area for lawyers to play in here as to are they or are they not fixtures. And let's see. And then further, the seller warrants that there are not and will not at the time of closing be any unrecorded leases or contracts relating to the property except as heretofore disclosed to buyers in writing. Okay. Second problem with our MLS contract is it uses no less than 3 different definitions of property in it. It uses property for land. It uses property for land and improvements. It uses property for personal property. So that's a term that is inherently ambiguous in our MLS contract. So if someone relies on, well, this is related to the property, the question is, well, is it or is it not? Because what is the property in the context of our MLS contract? So these are all things to be aware of, kind of little technicalities that will give lawyers a field day and potentially your clients headaches if this stuff isn't all dealt with up front and it's not very clear as to who's going to be responsible for what. So those are just kind of the, in the weeds legal issues and issues with our contracts that makes it all the more important that you as real estate agents deal with this stuff up front and not just, enter into the contract, let everyone make assumptions. And then as we're approaching closing, the seller's like, oh, wait, what do you mean I have to pay off the whole loan? I thought the buyers were going to pick that payment up. And there's a big misunderstanding. Okay, so owned outright, this is the easiest. So there's no financing, no lender to deal with, no lessor to deal with. They own the panels, they own the equipment associated with the panels. But it's important to understand that most of the time, I'd say 98% of the time, there are some obligations tied to the panel. So when you get the credits, the SREC credits under the Illinois Shines program, they're effectively paying up front for 15 years of power delivery. So in exchange for the party who installs those panels and getting those credits and passing them on to the homeowner, that system has to keep producing the energy for a period of 15 years. And there's some collateral and some payment, who's responsible for that if it gets shut off in the middle. And so there's an important step to make sure that energy delivery contract gets assigned from the original owner to the new owner, because it will now be the one that has control over the system, can see that it's still plugged in and delivering power. So there's a process. So even when a system's owned outright, it's important to understand that there's still some contractual obligations that tend to follow those systems and will be for, the first 15 years of solar, since that's how long those go. Okay, I'm gonna skip through some of this. One thing that I will point out that oftentimes lenders run into this issue of a UCC statement showing up on a title commitment. It's important to understand that the liens placed on solar panels are not actually liens on the real property. They're not covered by the title insurance policy. But it's kind of a square peg, square hole thing for lenders. Like they see thing on commitment, they say problem. If thing on commitment, even if thing on commitment doesn't compete with their mortgage. So that's kind of a technical thing that the lenders who are familiar with this can get over, and the title companies who are familiar with it can kind of tweak the exceptions in Schedule B to explain that the UCC is an informational disclosure, and that in fact it doesn't place a lien on the real property, which the mortgage secures, and it doesn't compete with the lender. Most solar financing companies will do like a quick release and refiling as kind of a workaround. That's what's kind of developed. They'll file a termination statement, let the mortgage get recorded, and then refile the UCC one to secure their collateral in the solar equipment. Skip through leads, go skip through power purchase. So what does this mean for you guys? Okay, here are some things that you need to do. And I'm sorry, this is really small, but first thing you need to do is determine the nature of the solar equipment. Is it owned? Is it leased? Is it financed or owned outright? The second thing is, if it is financed or leased, you need to get in touch with the third party as soon as you can, right? Because you're either going to have a loan agreement with continuing payments that need to get paid, that need to get assumed by the buyer, and they'll need to qualify for the loan underwriting requirements. So there's kind of a back end process that needs to happen there. Same thing with the lease. If the lease is going to be assumed by a new property owner, they have to get approval for that assignment from the lessor. And so allowing for some extra time to do those things is very important. The next thing, which is probably what I'd say is probably most important in terms of aligning expectations, is be clear at the time of offer what's going to happen. So who is going to be responsible for picking up any ongoing payments? Who's going to pay for any transfer fees? Is it intended that this go with the property, right? Because if it was in the listing, the seller and buyer are probably going to assume it goes with the property. But if push comes to shove, someone could always take the position that, hey, these are personal property at the end of the day, and the contract says the seller just have personal property removed. And so you could get in a situation that if the parties get sideways, the seller could say, well, whatever, I'll just have it removed. And then we won't have to worry about it. And the buyer says, well, that's not a good solution. I kind of want the solar panels. Yeah.
Are we gonna get these slides or should we be writing?
You can have them. I emailed them in PDF, so.
The whole thing's being recorded and it's gonna get circulated.
Okay.
But you can also, yeah,
I
I sent them over.
Practically writing down what you've written up there.
No.
I'll email the slides
Okay,
to
thank you.
everyone too.
And then the next one is be aware of the extra transaction costs, okay? There's gonna be some transaction costs in terms of getting the assignments. There's oftentimes an assignment fee. Bless you.
Thank you.
And then there's also, oftentimes, if you're handling this right, there's gonna be sometimes significant extra legal fees, right? Even the power purchase, the power delivery agreement, that's 100+ pages. And so like some of these documents that require kind of extra review and handling and guidance as to what you need to do to secure the approvals, if there's gonna be a heavy lien on the attorneys to do that, it's gonna be extra fees. When I get a new client and it has solar, I basically say, look, if you're handling all of this, if you're getting the approvals, getting the assignment paperwork, and you don't want my help with that, that's fine, no big deal. But if that changes, or I need to get involved out of necessity, or because you find out this is more cumbersome or time consuming than you think, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility for this to take a few hours to kind of get the buyer educated, get the buyer's attorney educated, get the information you need to make the request for transfer from either the lender or the lessor. And so there's a lot of extra that can go into it. So setting expectations is important. If you just assume that it's just gonna be taken care of, it's probably going to be brushed under the rug with the hopes that it doesn't blow up in the final hour, which I don't think is the best approach. And then, and the way to do that is to use a contract addendum from the outset. So I've developed an addendum. It's been circulated within the Bar Association. You guys are probably gonna ask, can you send that form to me? And I can't, because you guys know kind of the collaboration of the unauthorized practice of law, because it's not an MLS approved form. If I just give it to people to fill out and use on their own, all of a sudden I have now aided and abetted an unauthorized practice of law, and I'm not into that, okay? So there is one. I've shared it freely with the Bar Association. The attorneys have it. We are in the process of modifying a little bit more to make it more kind of check the box to facilitate a discussion between buyers and sellers, as opposed to dictating this is how it will be handled. But going through that process and that requirement kind of requires everyone to think through it and get aligned on the key issues. This has not been published yet, but this is the Chicago, the multi-board 8.0. This will be published in February. This is how they're planning to deal with it. As you can see, it's pretty bare bones. It basically is 3 check boxes. Is it owned outright? Is it owned and financed, or is it leased? And then it gives 3 days to deliver all the documents and 3 days for the buyer to terminate the contract and run or live with it. I think both those, they also have an attorney review period. And so I think the attorney review period is going to extend those dates regularly. That's going to get negotiated as part of the attorney review period up there. But that's how the Chicago area is dealing with it in their new multi-board 8.0 contract. Here are what I think are key elements of a good solar addendum. Again, you'll get this. I think it's much more than what the multi-board contract is doing. I think it identifies the nature of the system, but it also does some of these other things, like identifying a reasonable timeline for the delivery of those documents and securing the approval. It allocates responsibility to the parties as to the associated fees. It says how ongoing payments are going to be handled after closing, if those will be assumed by the buyer, if those are going to be paid off in the case of a loan by the seller. It determines if there are any ongoing incentives that exist. Usually under the Illinois Shines program, if the system is a small DG system, you get all your benefits, your SREC benefits from the state accelerated up front. Bigger systems, you have to take it over a period of years. And then firmly requires party cooperation, right? If you agree to how the system's gonna be handled, you then, from a legal standpoint, want to obligate the parties to cooperate to get that done, right? You don't want a seller or buyer to be able to simply not cooperate with the third party to make it so that the assignment or the assumption can't happen. So kind of a good faith cooperation requirement. And then what happens if a buyer doesn't qualify, right? If it's a lease system and the buyer doesn't qualify under the underwriting terms to assume the lease or assume the financing, then what? So those are all important things to consider. And that's it. So sorry, that was like an hour jammed into probably 10 or 12 minutes, and I'll be happy to field questions at the end.
Thank you.
Lawyers.
Butch,
I don't have
next.
a fancy PowerPoint, okay?
That's going down.
And I'm 120 hours shy of a law degree, so I'm not gonna offer any, opinions on that. We normally get involved, at Rector when one of these things that Randy talked about goes sideways. You're getting close to a closing and they don't know whether or not they're leased or owned or what it's gonna be. And then you're sitting down at the closing and all of a sudden this stuff comes up. Okay, I can't emphasize enough what Randy said about know all of this information ahead of time. The one primary thing that we really tell people is know who you're dealing with. There were 25 solar companies across the country that went belly up in 24. Okay? And we get those phone calls when you call because you're not seeing a savings on your power bill and you don't understand what happened. And then we reach out to Ameren for you and find out, oh, the system was never activated, the paperwork wasn't filed correctly and all of that, and they've paid this money for this stuff. And so, you know, we've kind of taken on the approach of when individuals call, you know, we're just trying to help from a standpoint of answering their questions, because all of a sudden you've got this on your roof and what do you do because you're not getting the benefit of it? You want to go sell your house and you find out the lease is, you know, as long as your arm, and you're trying to work through all of this to be able to get the lease transferred or whatever the case may be. So I can't emphasize enough, know who you're dealing with, know what this company is. Rector and all of the individuals that are involved with solar in our company and roofing are fourth generation people. I don't want to have to hide from you in the grocery store, okay? Because we screwed you over on a roof or a solar job, you know? At my age, I've tried to build a pretty good reputation in this community over the years, being in sales as long as I have, that I'm not gonna take advantage of you, and we're gonna work with you to help you resolve whatever problem there is, whether it was created by us or was created by somebody else. And we are averaging a couple of roofs leading into last month, a couple of roofs a month that we're dealing with this kind of stuff, okay? And then Shelley, these were passed out?
Yes.
Okay, we just put together a sheet of some questions to think about or to look at when you personally are entering into a solar agreement, or you're representing somebody as a real estate professional that maybe's got questions concerning what's going on with solar. That's all I got right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mine's gonna be pretty low tech and short and sweet too. In regards to how the appraisers view solar panels, green energy efficient systems, et cetera. I don't know about anybody else in the room. Oh, sorry. I can be pretty loud anyway. I don't know about any of you guys in the room, but I got more and more nervous the more Randy talked. I just got out of. And nothing against Randy. It's nothing against Randy. I firmly believe he's one of the best in town, and I think that's the nature of the legalities of this type of thing. It's I don't know if I want to call it emerging technology, but it's just not the normal run of the mill that we run into each day in central Illinois, although it is exponentially increasing in terms of the market acceptance, the popularity of solar systems, whether they're ground mounted, roof mounted. We've seen an explosion of homes with these types of systems in place. And it's in ways it's making our job easier. In ways it makes it harder too, because of as Randy mentioned, the different types of ownership that you can have adds another wrinkle of complexity to what we're trying to do when we value these types of systems. The lease systems, I completely agree. When it's not owned by the homeowner, it's extremely complicated. There's a lot of fine print. It's not a clear, concise valuation from the appraiser's perspective either. To be quite frank, we don't even put a contributory value. We don't even give any value whatsoever to a leased system that's not owned. We've had some deals where there was a contract payment or an installment payment type of thing. And we've had homeowners go ahead and just pay off the system to make it easier, kind of cut through some of the red tape, and then allow us to then value that system and give it some value, which usually is built into the purchase price. If your seller that you have has paid $40,000 for a solar system, whether it's roof mounted, ground mounted, or whatever, they're probably expecting to get something back out of that, right? And it's just how much can we as appraisers support? And the answer to that is it depends. I've seen, ground mounted systems on Wagon Trail Road in White Heath that cost $110,000 to put in. Of that $110,000 system, the homeowner told me they were gonna get $80,000 back in credits, rebates and all those kinds of things. So from them, from their perspective, to basically negate a $1,500 a month power bill with this and basically only be technically out of pocket $30,000, it was a no-brainer. We've also had homeowners that they put a $30,000 roof mounted solar array on their $70,000 home in Urbana. Just, I can't squeeze enough value out of that to help to make up and offset some of those differences that we see in the marketplace. So for me, it's again, pretty short and sweet. The most important thing for us, well, I guess I should back up too. You know, it's funny because as Randy started, he started off talking about how they treat legally that a solar array is personal property. If that's the case, I can't value it. I can only value real estate, right? You might need a personal property appraiser to go in and value a personally owned solar array. So we, as appraisers, we think of them differently, but we also want to just do the job right. And we also just want to treat people fairly and try to squeeze value out of it if we can, and if it's warranted. I'd say on average, again, it depends on how much value we can give. On average, we tend to see a return somewhere around 50%. So if somebody paid 40 grand for their system, we could probably try to get about 20,000 out of it. Underwriting is an issue in that if you have a subject property that you're appraising that has a roof mounted solar array, they're gonna wanna see some comps. They don't wanna see across the board adjustments of all similar homes, but none with solar. They wanna be able to see that value add, right? In what we call paired sales analysis. So it fluctuates quite a bit in the marketplace. I personally, and you guys probably feel the same way. If there was 20 some companies that went belly up, how many are there total? You know what I mean? I mean, is there 100 companies across the country or 1,000? I don't know. I feel like I had 20 of them knock on my door at least over the last 12 months or 18 months or so. And I want to make it clear, like I am a firm believer in all kinds of green energy concepts. I love solar, energy efficient systems like that. I tell everybody that ever asks my opinion about it. I love it, do it, pay for it. Pay for it and enjoy it, right? If you can afford it, do it. It's kind of like your swimming pool. If you're gonna swim, you love to swim, you live in Central Illinois, don't do it for a return on your investment, right? Do it for betterment of your life, enjoyment, et cetera, et cetera. Do it because you feel like you're giving back or saving the planet, whatever it is, do it and just enjoy it. And don't look at it like an investment, like you're gonna need to squeeze every penny back out of it when you go to sell. So that'd probably be my most basic thing. Again, after everybody's done, I'm totally open for questions.
Chris?
All right, first and foremost, I just want to second, Randy, you did sound exceptionally intelligent, but I'd really appreciate if we could make him go last next time.
Yeah.
Really, just for the rest of us. The good news is, the insurance portion of solar is not gonna affect a real estate transaction, too much. The only way I could ever see that happening is if the insurance agent doesn't know there's solar, there is an additional fee for having solar panels on your house. We do value it in as part of the home. So it could increase the premium a little bit. If your ratios are tight, there could be a little bit of a problem there. But from a transaction standpoint, if you can make sure the consumer knows to tell the insurance agent they've got solar, you're good to go from there. Last time I did this panel, I came up here and didn't have a lot of information to share because solar was fairly new. And this time when they asked, I was gonna say no, because I still didn't have a lot of information to share, because in our world, the key to having good information is time. We wanna see the risk be the same for a long period of time. And we've only had solar here in Central Illinois for a couple of years. So I reached out to some State Farm reps, some reps from AmFam, some reps that are independent to see what the consensus was of what's going on with insurance and solar. And I get the same information from them that I'm going to tell you from me. It's inconsistent. right now, if you've got a leased solar array, you need to ask your insurance agent, I know there's solar on my roof, but is it my responsibility? Because I don't have an ownership interest. How can I insure something without an ownership interest? As I'm talking with other carriers, some of us have won that fight with our carrier. Some of us have lost that fight with our carrier. So just make sure that your consumer knows to let them know there's solar on the roof. And from there, kind of gonna see some different things with some different carriers. Wouldn't be a bad idea to get a couple options when there's solar involved. That is all I had.
Awesome. Brad?
Sure.
Well, first, thanks for having me this evening. Appreciate it. The opportunity to come and chat with you for just a few minutes. Let me see if I can get the slides to the right spot. There we go. Okay. So we'll skip past that. That's just flow. So Shelley asked me to kind of dwell on a couple topics this evening, and then if there's additional questions, I'm certainly willing to field those whenever. So really two topics that I'm going to try to hit on this evening, really deal more around questions that sellers or buyers may have, especially buyers perhaps, that maybe they're a buyer that lives in a home right now and they don't have solar, but they're looking at a house that potentially does, right? And so they may have some questions about what does this really mean for me and my electric bill and that type of thing. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about tonight. One is this concept of what's called the net metering transition. And if you're very close to the world of solar, you may have heard about this. If you're not, then this is probably something completely new to you. But since the inception of solar in Illinois many years ago, there's been a program in place called net metering for residential and small commercial customers. So when I put a solar system on my house and it starts generating electricity, if it generates enough that I meet my load, any excess generation gets pushed back to the grid, right? And the electric meter on the house keeps track of that separately from the power that you use. Two different counters in the meter. At the end of the month, you get a credit for any kilowatt hours that get pushed back to the grid. That credit helps to offset the bill for the energy that you used, right? That's called net metering. And up until January 1st of this year, folks that were in that position could use those excess credits at the end of the month to offset both parts of their electric bill. And when I say both parts, I'm going to show you a picture of a bill in a few minutes. There's what we call the electric supply portion of the bill and the electric delivery portion of the bill, right? So two parts, and that is because in the state of Illinois, the utilities don't own generation, right? You're able to pick your electric supplier. So you pay Ameren Illinois, if you're an Ameren Illinois customer, you pay us for the delivery charge. That's the money that goes to Ameren. The electric supply portion goes to whoever your electric supplier is. It could be Ameren or it could be somebody else because you got the right to choose, right? So up until January 1st, you could offset both parts of your bill with that excess generation. As of January the 1st of this year, any new interconnections that happen after that point, those sites are only allowed to offset the electric supply portion of the bill with excess generation. So basically what happens is the ability to net out the delivery service charge goes away for those sites that come online after January 1st. So there's that cutoff point. So that's kind of an important thing to understand as you're going into that real estate transaction, that the ideal thing is, first of all, to see if the seller can get you a series of electric bills, maybe like the last year's worth of bills, right? There's a couple of good reasons for that. And one is that it helps the buyer understand how well is this system actually helping to offset the energy usage of this home. All right, so there's some value in that. You also get some understanding about where does this system fall with respect to the net metering transition. So anything that energized and got permission to operate from Ameren, if it's in our service territory, prior to January 1st of this year, gets full net metering and they get to keep that. They're what's called grandfathered in. So they will keep that full netting for the life of the system, regardless of whether the premise changes hands or not. So if the premise is sold, the new owners maintain that benefit. right, for the life of the system. Anything that gets permission to operate after the first of this year is bound to the new rules for the life of the system. So there's a difference there, and I'm gonna show you an example on the bill of what that difference looks like. So just something very important to keep in mind to talk to the current homeowner, find out when did the system come online, match that up, take a look at the series of monthly electric bills, get an idea of how well that system is, how much that system is offsetting the energy usage of the premise. So some very important things there. Let me go to the next slide. So, these numbers are pretty small. I don't know if you guys can see these numbers very well or not. The screen's not quite as big as I would hoped it would be. I had to cram them on here, but, there's a couple things I want to point out really quick. And I guess I'll take this with me maybe. Cause I don't have a pointer. Will it come out of there? All right, thank you. So this is an example, bill that I've kind of chopped up to make it fit on the page. This is like the second or third page of a typical bill that you get from Ameren, Illinois. But this is the really important part because this is where all the numbers are. I'm not gonna go through all the numbers tonight. We don't have the time to do that, but I'm just gonna point out a couple of important numbers that hopefully will help you understand what they really mean. In the bill, you'll see a line that says total kilowatt hours right there at the top. That's the first number. That's the energy that the home consumed during that billing period, okay? So that's the power that I used during that billing period. The next line says on-site excess generation. That equates to the amount of energy, kilowatt hours, that my system pushed back to the grid during that billing interval. So if my system is large enough that it's meeting my load and creating additional energy, I'm gonna push that back to the grid, and that's gonna be accounted for in that second line right there. And that's the key to understanding how does this really impact the overall bill. So there's a lot of math that goes on here, but essentially what it boils down to is you'll come out when you take the total kilowatt hours, subtract out the excess, and then if there's anything that carried over from the previous month. So there's this concept that if my system really generated a lot of energy and I generated so much excess that I actually met my entire consumption amount from the month and had some left over, then I carry that excess forward to the next month and I can use it against next month's bill. So that's what that carryover is all about. So you take the kilowatt hours used, what did I generate this month in excess, and did I have any carryover? All those numbers, when you do the math, results in a number that says, these are the kilowatt hours that I'm actually gonna pay for this month, and that's what's gonna affect my bill. This is the electric delivery portion that I talked about and the electric supply portion. And under the old net metering or the legacy net metering rules, that net value is used in both places. So in this particular bill, it was 856 kilowatt hours is what the net worked out to be. It's used in both places for the calculation of what is my bill, okay? The next example is what this exact same bill would look like if they're under the new rules. So I'm just gonna flip to the next slide. It's identical, except you notice I put some red lines here in the electric delivery portion. And that is because, as I explained earlier, the credits from net metering can no longer be used to net out the electric delivery part of the bill. So they still apply over to the supply side, but over here, instead of paying for 856 kilowatt hours, I'm paying the full usage of 1,730 kilowatt hours at the current rate. So that changes my electric delivery charge. It's actually, comes back to a higher level. So that's the difference for newer systems. That's how the bill would look different. So that's net metering and what's happening as far as the transition is concerned. And again, there's a lot of numbers on that page, and I realize it's probably somewhat confusing. If you have questions, catch up with me afterwards. We can talk about it a little bit more. The second topic that I'm going to talk about for just a couple minutes relates to rebates for system installations. So in other words, if a customer is looking at doing or installing a renewable energy system on their premise, what kind of rebates might be available to them from Ameren, Illinois? I'm gonna put this back because I'm getting tired of it. It'll go in there. There it goes. Okay. So in terms of rebates, there are actually two rebates available depending on what the customer installs with their system. So the first one is called the distributed generation or smart inverter rebate. That rebate is the most common one in the state for Ameren, Illinois customers. And essentially what that boils down to is when I install solar on my home, if the inverter that's part of that system meets the right requirements, then that system can qualify for a rebate, a one-time rebate from Ameren, Illinois of $300 per installed DC kilowatt of the system. When you install a solar system, there will be a certain number of solar panels installed. Each panel has a certain rating from a DC kilowatt perspective. You take all the panels and add them up, you come up with some number, right? Some number of kilowatts. That is what we base the rebate on. It's not based on the AC size of the system, it's based on the DC size of the system. But it's $300 per kilowatt for residential and small commercial systems. So I put an example there in the last bullet. So let's say a homeowner installs a 20 kilowatt AC system on their house. It's 20 kilowatt AC, but it's 25 kilowatt DC. So typically when you do a solar system, the DC size is slightly larger than the AC size. There's usually a ratio there and it just varies, but typically it's a little bit larger. And again, we go off the DC rating. So I would take 25 times 300, that's a $7,500 rebate. That's a one-time rebate that comes back to the system owner. The other rebate that's available as well is related to energy storage. So it's becoming increasingly popular with residential systems to pair solar with energy storage or batteries, as they're more commonly referred to. These types of systems have been around for a few years now, at least. But with the change in the net metering rules and the move away from being able to net out the delivery service charge, the battery option is going to become a much more attractive option for most people that are doing solar. And there's some financial, again, it's all about the numbers, but financially it can work out a lot better based on the new net metering rules if you do energy storage with your solar. So we do also have a rebate for installing energy storage, and that's another $300. And I think did I put 350? I should have put 300. I apologize. That slide is incorrect. It's $300 per installed kilowatt hour of the battery. So batteries have two ratings. Batteries have a kilowatt rating and they have a kilowatt hour rating. And we pay based off of the kilowatt hour rating of the battery. So there is currently a requirement that to qualify for the energy storage system rebate, the battery has to be in a certain configuration. It's called DC coupled with the solar system. So all that really means is that the energy storage system and the solar panels share the same inverter. That's what a DC coupled system is. They all run through the same inverter, right? That's the way the law that governs this rebate that the state of Illinois passed back in 2021 was written. It said the only way you could get the rebate is if those shared the same inverter. So that's the rule that we've been operating under for issuing this rebate. But I put this kind of there as I think the fourth bullet. There was some legislation that was recently passed, like right near the end of last year or early this year, by the state legislator that changed that. That said that's no longer a hard requirement. You can qualify for the rebate no matter how your system is configured. If you pair energy storage with solar, it can qualify for the ESS rebate, no matter how it's configured. That legislation hasn't been signed into law yet, but we expect it to be sometime soon, probably before the end of the quarter. And barring any unforeseen circumstance, we expect that to go into law. So when it does, that'll also help open up the market for energy storage, because then more customers will be, depending on their, there will be more opportunities for systems to qualify for that rebate. And that's largely because, in the marketplace right now, there's a broad, there's some vendors of systems that chose to go that route of DC coupled systems, but there are other vendors, very prominent vendors that didn't, that went the other way with AC coupled systems. And so those systems were always a little bit handicapped because they couldn't qualify for the energy storage rebate, but now they will once this goes into law. Then there's an example there at the very end of if a customer did a 20 kilowatt hour system, what kind of rebate would they be looking at? One-time rebate. And the other thing that I didn't really put in this slide, I should have, but I didn't, is the fact that both rebates are a given premise. If it does both solar and energy storage, can take both rebates. They're not exclusive. You don't have to take one or the other. You can take both. The only other important point, and this is also a good tidbit to keep in your head as you're dealing with selling a home that has energy storage, is if they took the rebate, they commit that house to participating in a specific, I think I put it up there as the next to last bullet. So they have to participate in one of 3 different programs for the life of the system. And these are programs that basically affect the rate that that premise pays for their electric service. So there's 3 different programs there noted: peak time rewards, real-time pricing, or power smart pricing. Those are 3 programs currently offered by Ameren Illinois that somewhat modify the rate that a given house or a given premise will pay for their electric energy charge. So it's important to understand that, because again, as I said, when they take the rebate, they lock that premise in to having to participate in one of those 3 programs for the life of the system, regardless of whether the house changes hands or not. So if you're selling or your client is buying a home that has energy storage paired with their solar, it's very important to ask that homeowner, did this system qualify for that and take that ESS rebate? And if so, let's look at the bill and let's see what program this house is currently signed up for, because it'll be on the bill. What pricing program does this particular house currently participate in? And if there's any questions about that, the current homeowner can reach out to Ameren Illinois Customer Service and they can get that information very quickly about what program is this in. The premise is eligible to switch between any of those 3 programs at any point in time, but it has to remain enrolled in one of them. There's no way to opt out of it or claw back and say, I don't want to be in one of these. Well, so be it. Until they change the law, until the legislation changes, that's the way it has to be. Because that is not an Ameren Illinois rule. That is a rule that came out of legislation that was passed in 2021 by the state of Illinois. That was attached to the rebate offering. Did I have anything else? Let me check. That was it. So 2 topics. Hopefully there's some value in that for you. That's all I have. So pass it on.
Thank you. Sam?
Thank you.
Oh, would you mind passing it to Mike? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I will go over some requirements of what is required in the village of Savoy. I cannot speak for other municipalities, only for Savoy. So currently there's a few codes that have been adopted by the village that are required to be followed for solar systems. The International Fire Code, the International Residential Code, and the National Electrical Code. They are current as of today. These are the adopted codes. However, they can and will probably be changing in the next 6 months or so. There's a code review process to update for new codes. So basically what that means, so the fire code that we've adopted in Savoy is 2018 International Fire Code. requires, some certain safety things. A couple of them, that I'll go over real quick are some access pathways that are required for firefighters to access the roof, if they had to get on the home. And these are dependent on the size of the system and how much, area they take up. There's also a requirement to have them set back from the ridge line a certain amount, again, dependent on, how much percentage of the roof is covered by solar. So just a few, examples there for you, and if you have more specific questions, then we can absolutely address those as they come up. Just a copy of our building permit, couple things that I will tell you that the building permit in Savoy for solar requires is a letter from a structural engineer or an architect that they have reviewed the roof trusses to confirm that those will be able to hold the weight of the panels with the snow load already designed for. So that's a good thing for your potential, home buyers, that that system has been evaluated and that is required as part of the permitting process. And we actually have seen some failures here in Savoy locally on a commercial roof. Although it was certified by an architect and engineer, there was a structural failure, so they can and do happen. And then the last thing I'll go over real quick is a rapid shutdown system. So the National Electrical Code, starting in 2014, which is our currently adopted code, has required a way for basically firefighters to quickly de-energize the rooftop system. Sometimes just shutting off the inverter may not turn that system off. So there's a rapid shutdown process, and there's also some signage that us and Ameren required to be near or on the meter, so that way it protects the firefighters and they know that there is a solar system, how they need to shut that down. That's all I have for my portion. I'm happy to answer any other questions, and thanks again.
Awesome, thank you, everybody. Cool, now we have some questions that people prepared ahead of time. So I guess while Sam doesn't have the mic anymore. But I was just one of the questions for you was, what were some of those potential fire hazards and how could those be minimized?
Sure, so first I would say make sure that whatever installer that you're using is familiar with the building codes in that municipality. There are, I'm not gonna say there's not risks, there are risks with any electrical system. However, there's a lot of safety codes that they're required to follow. National Electrical Code, the building codes, and those are all safety codes that are there for the homeowners and for the system. There has been fires, there can be, but know that the codes and for sure, since we work with Ameren Illinois, their safety in mind and hopefully minimizes the risks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just go backwards down the line if that's all right with you guys. Brad, one of the questions was if you lose power, do the panels provide any backup? I assume that's depending on if you have a storage device.
Yeah, maybe. So if most solar only systems, if they're not paired with energy storage, when the grid drops out, if Ameren has, or the service has an outage, usually the system will shut down. There is one vendor now that does produce a system that is solar only that will, with the right installation, be able to provide backup power to the house if the grid drops out. But obviously, because it's only getting energy from the panels, it has to be daylight. And there has to be enough sun to be able to power whatever it is you're trying to power in the home, right? So in most cases, to get that type of system, you need to pair energy storage with the solar system. Like I said, there are many vendors on the market now producing those types of systems. They're being widely marketed now in the state of Illinois. So again, I believe as time goes by, you're going to start seeing more and more homes where that has happened, where you've got solar, plus you've got one or more batteries in the garage or out in the basement or on the back wall of the house, wherever they might be. So it will become more and more common.
Cool, thank you. Keep moving down the line. Chris, I think you might have touched on it briefly, but is there a cost difference on insurance for owned versus rent leased?
Well, back to the wild, wild west, there is some debate. So when I talk with the other carriers, some carriers are making you insure it as if you own it, whether you lease it or own it. And some carriers are not having you insure the panels themselves if you lease them. So it's going to depend on the carrier. I will say Country doesn't charge if you're leasing them. But, there's gonna be some fluctuation in that until we have a little bit more time under tension.
Cool, thank you. All right, Mark, a solar panel is gonna make my assessed value go up.
No,
You speak for the board.
what? I used to serve on the Champaign County Board of Review another lifetime ago, I feel like, but I do not speak for them anymore. I can guarantee you though, Illinois, I'm gonna read this real quick just so I don't mess up the tax code thing, but Illinois solar property tax exemption is governed by 35 ILCS 200/10-5.5. And it's something that Pritzker signed specifically to disallow solar panel systems, whether they're roof mounted, ground mounted, what have you, from being added into your tax assessment. So taxes are, the market's up, I mean, taxes are going up. They shouldn't go up due to your solar system of any type that you have.
Cool, thank you. All right, Butch, I know we kind of like touched on some things you should be asking and looking for. Could you tell us a little bit about like the roof warranty and how that works when you're putting panels on it?
It's not gonna affect the roof warranty as far as the shingles, but you'll see a lot of instances where people want to take advantage of the solar and they're putting them on roofs that need to be replaced. Okay, and so then you got an issue where you're putting panels on a 15-year-old roof and 5, 6, 7 years down the road, you've now got the expense to take the panels off. So
And typically that expense, I mean, I'm sure it varies, but like, what are you seeing right? And what's the process? Like, are you removing the panels to put a new roof on, putting it back?
in our situation, because we do both solar and roofing, we have the ability to go in, say on a Monday, take all the panels off, because you just don't take them off and stack them in a corner. There's a specific way they've got to be done. Replace the roof on a Tuesday, put the panels back in on a Wednesday, you're down 48 hours from generating power. Okay, so you attempt to do that in any situation you can.
Great. Great. All right, Randy, what happens to your solar warranty if the company goes out of business?
Well, it depends what company. So most of the panels will probably have a like manufacturer warranty. So if they're manufactured by a reputable manufacturer, it may not matter that the installer goes out of business if you have a actual failure in a panel. Otherwise, your warranty is a contract just like anyone else. And if there's no one there to service it, you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. So that's what it is in terms of workmanship, in terms of warranty on installation. You're beholden to whoever did the installation with respect to actual hardware. If that installer used a reputable panel supplier, you may be able to have the panel replaced, but that only helps you to an extent because they might say, okay, we'll send you a new panel, go find somebody to put it back on for you. So, I mean, it still has some value, but there's kind of two different warranties in play, and who's responsible for servicing them probably depends. But a warranty is just another contract.
Cool, thank you.
And we've seen situations where they know who installed them, but they don't know where the panels came from. So if the company goes out of business, as you said, and you gotta go against the company that manufactured, and if you don't know that information, then you really are up a creek.
Makes sense, makes sense. And then Randy, one more question for you. Does the contractual obligation for energy delivery via the Illinois Shines remain in effect after an ownership transfer?
It does, yeah, it's kind of like the locking them into a certain Ameren plan. It follows the system, so it's a 15-year delivery obligation that runs with the system. That's what spooks some buyers, right? If they think that the system is owned outright and they think this is, hey, just go pay the purchase price and get a deed and carry on. Sometimes they're caught off guard when they're given kind of assumption paperwork and they have to kind of assume this solar delivery obligation. They kind of get spooked. They say, wait, I wasn't planning on having any extra obligation. I don't want to do that. And so that's why the communication is so important up front, is to educate them that how this Illinois Shines program works, and that it's likely going to apply to almost any solar system right now, because again, it's a 15-year system and there aren't too many solar arrays that are over 15 years old that I'm aware of. If they do, they probably look like those big old 15-foot satellite dishes that used to precede DirecTV.
Yeah.
Cool. I have a few more questions on this list, but I want to make sure we have enough time for all you guys. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Chris was first, sorry.
All right, I'm sure it's gonna be, it depends, but just for you, Chris.
Here we go.
From what I remember from last time we were here, this is your roof and this is your solar, and you have a hailstorm, right? So only the perimeter gets damaged on the roof by the hail. From what I remember last time, they'll only cover the part of the roof that was damaged. It depends on by the different carrier.
But it's gonna depend by the different carrier. I can tell you, if you're talking about a small area, most carriers are gonna replace the whole roof.
But if you're just taking the check and not replacing the roof.
Well, if you're just taking the
It's a check.
ACV settlement, then you just
That's
get
gonna
that
be
first
less.
check, not both of them.
Yeah.
Thanks, attorney.
If that covers most of that section of the roof though, and you get damaged just around this. I mean, our insurance company's saying, hey, the rest of the roof, because you can't just replace this on a roof, right?
It's gonna be, if they can just replace the portion of the roof that's damaged, they're just gonna replace the portion of the roof that's damaged. If they've got to remove the panels to do the repair, they're gonna remove the panels and do the repair.
And is the removal and reinstallation covered by the insurance these days?
Well, back to my old answer of it depends. There are some carriers that are making you list, even if it's leased, that you have solar and charging an additional fee because they know that replacement is a part of the process, and there are some carriers that aren't yet doing it. With those carriers, I don't know how that claim would play out. We require you to list that you have solar, even if it's leased. You're paying a slight fee for that. So yes, we're going to cover the removal and replacement of those solar if that happens, even in a lease situation.
We've seen it both ways. The insurance companies picked up the tab to take the panels off, put the panels back on, and then other companies that have said, that's on you.
Why does, cause like if let's just say,
I can tell you from our perspective, if you didn't tell the company that you had solar, we're not gonna cover it. If we knew you had solar, even if you're leasing it and we're not charging you to replace the panels in the cost of a total loss, we are gonna cover the removal and replacement of those panels.
Awesome. Right now?
First couple of questions, so.
Oh, man.
great
That's
minds.
a good question. Yeah.
I will say I have solar on my house and the company who did ours required us to add it to our insurance. Like that was their part of the contract. And then this might be a strange question, but does anybody know, can you transfer solar companies? Can you like, or is it the contracts with them and if you? I know it's a weird question, but.
Yeah, so the solar company does the installation and that's not transferred. You as the new owner can assume that installation contract and the warranty that's associated with it. You can, if it's assumable, if the terms are not specific to the owner. But you can't like force that. You can't like, I don't like mine, I want a different one.
Yeah.
You can't switch that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And maybe Butch, you'd be able to talk about this, but like, I think you can switch who's servicing your panels if they're owned outright. But you can't switch like who you owe money to if you got them on a contract purchase. Is that right?
Well, there's multiple companies out there, like we use Carbon Solutions to track for the Illinois Shine stuff. And there's other companies out there that can do that now. That's a good question, whether people really move from one company to another company, they're all basically doing about the same thing.
That's the aggregator, right?
Right, yes.
Cool.
I have a
Yeah.
backup question to that. What if the company goes bankrupt or out of business? Can you, at that point, switch to a different solar company? Because that company is no longer able to service them. Can you switch those panels to a different company?
No, again, it comes back, that's like saying, can I hire a different like HVAC technician to work on my furnace. Sure you can. You can hire anyone to come service what's there, but they're not gonna honor the warranty. They're not, like, they don't have, you can hire whoever you want to service it, just like you can any other
If they
system.
go
house.
bankrupt or out of business, then the warranties are null and void and you're SOL.
Hopefully you have them a lot of fun.
Unless you've got a warranty, and the warranty that's on the panel, you could still approach the company on to ask, hey, I've got a bad panel, okay?
But so long as you know who manufactures. it.
Exactly.
I guess I'll add something to that too, is that in general, and I'm sure you can back me up on this, when you look at a solar system, the most likely point of failure is the system inverter, not the solar panel itself. Panels are fairly resilient as long as they don't get bombarded by hail, right? They're a device that's gonna pretty much survive the life of the system. But the system inverter is the most likely point of failure. Typically, the system inverter is not made by the same company that makes the panels, right? System inverter is gonna have the manufacturer's name clearly on it. It's gonna have a serial number. Google it, right? You can get a manufacturer contact. So if your installer company is belly up and no longer, you've still potentially got an avenue with if the inverter does fail, you've potentially got an avenue to contact that manufacturer if they're still in business and potentially work through a warranty claim with them.
And in general, how long is that warranty? Is it the life of? the-
Inverter warranties, they seem to be all over the place. They're getting better and better all the time as far as duration. But you know, older inverters that have been out there for 2 or 3 or 5 years, you know, some of those may have only been 5-year warranties, right? But I think now they're getting better, right?
Yeah,
They're
they're
getting
getting-
longer term warranties.
15 plus on
Right.
inverters and 25 plus on panels.
But if
'Cause
it's an
the-
older system, then you just don't know.
You just don't
Warranty could
know.
be gone.
Right? It's always wise to, you know, if you can find somebody, if your client's buying a home with an older system, if there's anybody available that's knowledgeable to help inspect and look at what's there now, there may be some advantage in getting that kind of information.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, that's
Get out of that.
20 to 25 years on panels roughly.
15 on inverters, 25 roughly on panels, and it will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer.
Excellent, thank you, sir.
And I guess follow up on that, does efficiency reduce with the life of the panels?
Yes. The industry guideline, and there again, panel to panel, the ones that we use will lose about 0.5% efficiency over the life of the panel. So if you've got a 25 or 30-year panel, you're still gonna be producing at 80+% of what the panel originally started.
Thank you. Actually, we'll go Joe again, so we'll come back to you.
So, Aaron question, so when they receive the credits back, is it 1-for-1 per kilowatt hour produced, is that equal dollar amount, or percent per kilowatt hour amount, or is it different?
Yeah, really good question. I didn't hit on that, but the credit, under the legacy net metering rules, it was a 1-for-1 kilowatt hour credit. Okay? Under the new rules, that same credit, 1-to-1 kilowatt hour still exists, but now there's a new option under the new net metering rules that allows the customer to select, instead of getting a kilowatt hour credit, I want to get a monetary compensation for that excess generation. That gets a little more complicated, but because determining the exact cents per kilowatt hour that you're going to get as a customer depends on who your energy supplier is. Is it Ameren, Illinois, or is it a third-party supplier? That'll factor into what you get for each kilowatt hour of excess if you take the monetary compensation. So just from my own perspective, we're still struggling to understand why a customer would ever want to take a monetary compensation, because they can't use that money to offset the delivery side of the bill. So even if you're getting a monetary compensation, it can only be used to offset the electric supply side of the bill. So unless you're trying to hedge that the price of energy is gonna go down in the future, which that seems unlikely, there's really probably no good reason. You'd be better off just to stick with the kilowatt hour compensation method under the new rules.
Cool, thank you. Yeah.
How, another question for you, what's the timeline on the rebate? How fast do you get it? When do you,
So generally, if a homeowner is working with a solar reseller, which that's typically the way it's done, right? Most folks don't do a self-install for many different reasons, but typically you work through a solar installer. The installer will file the application for the interconnection with Ameren Illinois, if you're an Ameren customer, right? All this is assuming that you're an Ameren customer. They'll file the application with us for the interconnection. That will go through its life cycle. When the app reaches the point where your system is now given permission to operate by Ameren, it's installed, we've inspected it, we've done our testing on it, we issue what's called permission to operate. Once the customer receives that, that's typically the point at which the rebate gets applied for, right? And typically it's the installer that does the application on behalf of the customer, right? So, and again, decisions are made about if I did solar plus energy storage, am I gonna apply for both rebates or just one or whatever? You decide what you're gonna apply for. The installer files that application with us. If there are no issues with the application in terms of incomplete information provided, if it flows normally, it should be a relatively short process, probably less than a month, right? But we do see occasions where the application gets filed and there's either a piece of information missing or just not supplied. And we have to go back to the applicant and say, oh, by the way, we can't process a rebate yet. You got to give us more information. That can cause it to drag out.
can it be too late?
Can it be too late as in you're no longer eligible?
Well, yeah, like my clients don't know of a rebate.
Right,
possibility.
and the answer to that is no. There is no expiration date for the rebate. Either rebate, whether it's the smart inverter rebate for the solar part of the system or the energy storage rebate. So if a customer has a system on their home and it's been there for a couple years, and they believe that the system never took the rebate, it can be applied for. And we'll have record of it. If they're an Ameren customer,
Yeah.
we'll have a record of whether we paid out a rebate on that home or not. So, if we have paid out, then then it was paid and somebody got the rebate. But we can't pay again.
Sure, no, yeah.
Go follow up on that. If you're a subsequent owner, so if you're a buyer, is there a way to like reach out? One, can you still apply for a rebate on a system you didn't install? And assuming you can, is there a way to reach out to Ameren and figure out if the prior owner applied for and received a rebate?
Yes. The place to start is by calling our 1-800 customer service number. So you can look that up. It's like 1-800-555-5000 or 7000, something like that. That's where you would start. You'd say, hey, I'm trying to find out if this particular residence ever took any of the solar rebates. And they may not be able to tell you, the first line customer service may not, but they'll take the information and probably get it to my team. And we can look it up and tell for sure if it did.
Cool. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, Chris?
Is there a more common, like, I guess, they're gonna go, a lease versus they finance it themselves? Is there a more common thing that you guys see as far as contracts where people install solar? Do they generally the lease? Is it the more common or the more preferred way for folks to put it on, or do they generally give if I finance it with a home equity or did whatever, just paid for it outright?
I would have said finance, but in speaking with Butch when we were preparing, it sounds like maybe leases are more on the rise.
They're on the rise. Nationally, about 30 to 35% are lease systems because there's no money down. Not fronting money and doing those along those lines, but you're not gonna get the full benefit of actually owning the system. And when you own your system, most payoffs are 3 to 5 years on 25 to 30-year-old panels. So after you get through that period of time, you're eliminating a lot of your power bill, majority of your power bill, and you're not making a payment anymore on your system.
Yes, sir.
Okay, if somebody has a lease system, who gets the rebate?
Is that the company that put?
Good question.
Or is it the?
The house. And I can't speak across the board, but in the cases that I've been exposed to, the lease company takes all the rebates.
And they will claim to you that you get in turn a lower lease
Right.
rate.
Yeah.
but
Right.
It's up to you to do the math as to how that arbitrage is.
Cause I think in most cases, those leasing companies, they take everything. So they take the rebates from us, Ameren, Illinois. They take any tax credits and they take the upfront SREC payment that was talked about earlier. They take all that, right? And that's supposed to be factored in to help give you a lower lease rate, right?
But they do that, I mean, even on a finance deal, they keep that and then the amount you finance is reduced. Hopefully dollar for dollar, but, certainly.
Any other audience questions? Well, I do have a couple others from the list. We'll kind of go through them rather quickly. First off, Randy, somebody with solar panels dies and there's still a lien on the property for the panels. What happens?
All right, first of all, there's no lien on the property for panels, so.
Not my question.
What's that?
That was my
No, that's important. That goes back to kind of the legal stuff I mentioned. You can't put a lien on the property as a result of the panels. You can put a lien on the panels. And the answer is that lien survives. It's like if you had a lien on a car, right? If you had a car loan and the person who owned the car died, that loan, that lien is still on the car and the estate is responsible for paying off that debt. Same thing for the solar panel.
Cool, thank you. Butch, what maintenance is required on solar panels? Is there anything owners should do?
There's not a lot of maintenance on solar panels. Now, this time of year with our lovely central Illinois weather, you're gonna get ice and snow and one thing and another. I do not suggest that you climb up there to try to knock that stuff off. If it's just snow, you can brush it off with an extended pole. But then during the summer months, Mother Nature does a pretty good job of washing it away with a good thunderstorm and things along that line. Now we go into a 6-week drought. You don't feel like it's generating as much. Yes, you can hose the panels down and to get some of the dust off of them, but they're pretty maintenance free.
Cool, thank you. Mark, how can you determine the value and the time required to break even on a solar panel installation? Would you like to walk us through that present value?
No, I'm not gonna go through full on net present value. But that, I mean, that goes to one of the other questions that somebody had asked earlier in terms of like, if you know, panels are damaged or whatever, how does that affect your appraisal, right? Or if you've got some type of an issue with the components that bring that electricity generated into your home. I mean, in most cases, it's just like, what if you have a broken window in your house? Right? You go get it fixed, you go get it replaced. Butch had talked a little bit about over time, the efficiencies of those systems might decline a little bit, but are we as appraisers going to get into the finite capitalization of trying to figure out like, okay, it's only a 90% efficient system where it was 100% or whatever, and it's like, the answer is no. Not on your $400 appraisal that we gotta do for the bank. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen. The true value that we as appraisers are giving for the solar panels isn't even really for the real estate itself, right? It's not, the home isn't aesthetically improved. I don't think most people would consider aesthetically improved because you've got solar panels on it, right? It doesn't really add anything to the curb appeal. It doesn't add anything to the functionality of the home. It generates you money every month. It saves you money, which generates you money, right? And so technically, trying to quantify and capitalize what those energy savings are, if your power bill is normally $300, and now with the solar array, it's down to $250 or down to $50. That $250 a month in savings is what you would actually try to quantify to figure out, you know, how long would you need to pay on this thing before it basically starts making you money at the end of the day. I guess that's a short version of NPV, but whatever. But that's the true definition of what we're really valuing there. It's not necessarily the panels, it's not the hookup into your house. it's the fact that that is a desirable system because it saves you money. It creates you income. It generates electricity. There was, I know Phil already left, but there's like 4 different appraisers in this room, right? And each, if you hold each one of us on what we thought would be, our adjustment for a solar panel system, we probably have 4 slightly different answers for you. Right? It's based on what we see in the marketplace. It's what we have quantified in our own experiences with these types of systems. And it's, there's no straight answer. Kind of like Chris said, it depends, right? It just depends. And in certain market segments of homes, they're gonna be way more accepted than they are on that little $60,000-$70,000 house in Urbana that had a $30,000 system on it. That the guy thought he was living his dream, but then, you know, it kind of turns into a nightmare once he can't squeeze the value back out of it, and then he's underwater on that thing, so. Anyways.
Any other audience questions? Cool.
I've got one
Yeah.
quick question for Brad, and I think you confirmed this earlier, but I think it's worth saying out loud. So when you get the energy supply notices saying, hey, you can switch this energy suppliers, we noticed on the last one we got, there's a little thing on there that says, beware, this could change your net metering rules, which freaked us out as attorneys. So we went and looked back and said, oh crap, do we need to go notify all these people who got these mailings saying you're about to be opted into a different supplier, and tell them if they've got solar, they're at risk of losing their kind of full net metering. Our conclusion was, no, it goes with the system. I heard you say that's accurate. And so that was probably just somebody at the supplier's lawyer saying, hey, let's cover our asses and put a little disclaimer in here so we don't get in trouble if it's somebody's net metering gets screwed up.
Right.
But it was on there. I know at least one person who caught it and reached out and was like, whoa, hey, is this gonna put my metering at risk?
Right, and I don't wanna drag this out too far, but there was another piece of the puzzle that I didn't really talk about. When I talked about when I showed you the on-site generation crediting, and the fact that, you know, you're able to get generation credits from panels that you install on your own roof, there is also the concept of community solar, which I don't know how many of you heard of community solar and understand what it is, but it's a program that customers can sign up for who maybe they don't want to invest in a solar system on their house, but they want to maybe perhaps get a little bit of a break on their bill from clean energy. And so there's this concept of a community solar subscription, where basically I sign up or I subscribe to a community solar site. And I work with the company that owns that site to secure that subscription. And essentially I pay a subscription per month, a subscription fee to that company. They allocate a certain number of kilowatt hours or a certain percentage of the generation from that solar site that I subscribe to my bill as a credit, a kilowatt hour credit on my bill. So that's the concept of offsite generation, right? And so that can also help to offset my bill. And that is a scenario that the credits that come back as part of that subscription can be impacted in terms of the part of your bill that they can offset, depending on whether you take supply from Ameren or whether you take supply from a third party energy supplier. So that's part of what can potentially impact that too, is if you're a community solar subscriber and you're taking service from a third party for electric supply.
Cool, thank you. Anything else? Last chance? Cool, one more round of applause for the panelists. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, Janice, thank you for putting this on.
Yeah, well, the community member involved with group.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in terms of why. I see some of these systems. Yeah.
It's good to know that like in FBA and other